Jimmy, you lost someone close to you in Vietnam recently. How do you keep performing when the world feels this dark? Dick Cavett's question hung in the air of the television studio. The audience, expecting another light-hearted exchange about music or fashion, went quiet. The cameras stayed on Jimi Hendrix's face as he processed the question. 5 seconds of silence. 10 seconds. The kind of silence that makes live television producers nervous. And then Jimi spoke. And what he said in the next 2 minutes left the entire studio, the host, the audience, the crew, in complete, stunned silence. Not the polite silence of waiting for someone to finish, the profound silence of people who've just heard something that changed how they see the world. This is the story of the question that shouldn't have been asked on a talk show, and the answer that turned a late-night TV appearance into one of the most moving moments in television history. Late 1969, America was fracturing. The Vietnam War was at its peak. Young men were dying thousands of miles away for reasons that fewer people understood or agreed with every day. The country was split, pro-war, anti-war, hawks, doves, generations at odds. And the casualties were mounting. Not just soldiers, but friends, brothers, classmates, people who'd been alive and laughing and full of potential, suddenly gone. Jimi had lost someone, a friend from his childhood in Seattle, a guy named Billy who'd enlisted in 1967, full of patriotic energy and confidence. "I'll be home in a year," Billy had told Jimi. "We'll jam when I get back." Billy didn't come home. He died in the jungles of Vietnam in September 1969, 22 years old. And Jimi, performing at Woodstock just weeks after Billy's death, had dedicated his rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner to him, though few people knew that at the time. The Woodstock performance had been revolutionary. Jimi playing the national anthem with feedback, distortion, sounds that evoked bombs and screams and chaos. Some people called it unpatriotic. Others called it the most honest version of the anthem ever performed. But what almost nobody knew was that Jimi was playing it for Billy, for his friend who died in a war that Jimi didn't understand. 2 months later, in November 1969, Jimi was booked on the Dick Cavett Show. It was supposed to be a light appearance, talk about music, maybe play a song, keep it entertaining, keep it safe. But Dick Cavett had other plans. Cavett wasn't like other talk show hosts. He asked real questions, pushed past the surface, wanted substance, not just celebrity fluff. And he'd read about Billy, about Jimi's connection to this young soldier who died in Vietnam, about the Woodstock performance that some people still didn't understand. Before the show, Cavett's producers warned him, "Don't ask about Vietnam. Don't ask about Billy. It's too heavy for late-night TV. People want to be entertained, not depressed." But Cavett thought the question mattered, thought the conversation was important, and he trusted that Jimi, if given the space, might say something worth hearing. The show started normally. Jimi came out, sat down, charmed the audience with his quiet charisma. They talked about music for a few minutes, about Woodstock, about fame, the usual talk show rhythm. And then Cavett shifted. His tone changed. The easy banter stopped, and he asked the question that his producers had told him not to ask. "Jimi, I want to ask you about something serious, if that's okay." Cavett's voice was gentle but direct. "I know you lost someone close to you in Vietnam recently, a friend from childhood. And I'm curious, when the world feels this dark, when you're dealing with that kind of loss, how do you keep performing? How do you get on stage and play music when everything feels heavy?" The studio audience shifted. This wasn't the tone they'd expected. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was real. Jimi looked at Cavett, then down at his hands. The seconds stretched. 5 seconds. The director in the control room started to panic. Dead air on live television. 10 seconds. Cavett didn't interrupt, didn't try to fill the silence, just waited. Finally, Jimi looked up, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. "His name was Billy," Jimi said.
We grew up together in Seattle. He played a little guitar, too. Not seriously, just for fun, but he loved music. We'd sit around and play for hours when we were kids. The audience was completely still. You could hear the cameras humming. Billy enlisted in '67, Jimi continued. He believed in it, the war, thought he was doing something important. And I didn't know what to think. Still don't. But he was my friend, so I supported him. Told him I'd see him when he got back, that we'd jam together. Jimi paused, took a breath. Cavett sat perfectly still, giving Jimi all the space he needed. He died in September, Jimi said quietly, and I found out right before Woodstock. And I was angry at the war, at the people who sent him there, at Billy for going, at myself for not, for not doing something, anything. The studio was silent except for Jimi's voice. You asked how I keep performing, Jimi said, looking directly at Cavett now. How I get on stage when everything feels heavy. And the truth is, music is all I have. Music is what we have when words fail, when the world doesn't make sense, when we're angry or scared or grieving, and we don't know how to process it. Jimi's eyes were wet now, but his voice stayed steady. At Woodstock, when I played the national anthem, I was playing it for Billy, for all the Billies. I was trying to tell the truth about what's happening, the bombs, the chaos, the loss, not the sanitized version we're supposed to believe, the real version, the one that hurts. Someone in the audience was crying quietly. You could hear it. Music, Jimi continued, is the only honest thing I know how to do. I can't bring Billy back. I can't stop the war. I can't fix what's broken, but I can play. And when I play, I'm trying to, process it, heal it, share it, make people feel something real in a world that asks us to feel nothing. Jimi stopped talking, looked down at his hands again, and the studio stayed silent. Cavett didn't speak, couldn't speak. He was supposed to be the professional, the one who always had the next question, the smooth transition. But he sat there, visibly moved, unable to find words. The audience didn't applaud, didn't make a sound, just sat with what they'd heard. The silence lasted 15 seconds. On live television, that's an eternity, but nobody moved to break it. The director didn't cut to commercial. The band didn't start playing. Everyone in that studio understood that something important had just happened, that this wasn't a moment to interrupt. Finally, Cavett spoke. His voice was rough, emotional. "That's," he started, then stopped, collected himself. "That's the most honest answer I've ever received on this show. Thank you for that." Jimi nodded slightly. "I think," Cavett continued, "everyone watching now understands what you were doing at Woodstock, what you're always doing. You're not just playing music, you're telling the truth." "Trying to," Jimi said quietly. The show continued, but the energy had shifted. Cavett asked a few lighter questions, trying to bring the mood back up. Jimi played a song. But everyone in that studio knew that the real moment had already happened, that everything else was just aftermath. After the show, Cavett found Jimi backstage. "I'm sorry if that question was too much," Cavett said. "My producers told me not to ask it." "It was the right question," Jimi said. "I needed to say that, needed to talk about Billy. People should know why I played the anthem that way, what it meant." "The response we're getting," Cavett said, "the phones are going crazy. People calling in, saying they finally understand, saying they needed to hear what you said." "Good," Jimi said. "Billy would have liked that. He always said music should mean something, should do something, not just entertain." The broadcast of that episode became legendary.
not for the music Jimi played, though that was beautiful, but for those 2 minutes when Jimi talked about Billy, about loss, about using music to process grief and anger and confusion. Television critics wrote about it. The moment late-night television grew up, one reviewer said, when entertainment became art, became truth. The clip circulated. People who'd criticized Jimi's Woodstock performance, called it disrespectful, unpatriotic, saw it differently after hearing him talk about Billy, understood that it wasn't disrespect, it was the opposite. It was honoring his friend by telling the truth about the war that killed him. Dick Cavett, years later, was asked about the most memorable moments from his decades hosting a talk show. He had interviewed presidents, Nobel Prize winners, the biggest stars in the world, but he always came back to that night with Jimi Hendrix. "I asked him a question I probably shouldn't have asked," Cavett said, about his friend who died in Vietnam, about how he keeps performing when the world is dark, and his answer, it wasn't what I expected. It was profound. It was honest. It was the kind of answer that makes you realize you're not just doing a talk show, you're witnessing someone's humanity. "Do you remember the silence after he finished?" the interviewer asked. "I'll never forget it. 15 seconds, an eternity on live TV, but nobody wanted to break it, because we'd all just heard something real, something that mattered. And in that moment, entertainment didn't matter. Being smooth didn't matter. All that mattered was honoring what Jimi had just shared." "Did you stay in touch with him?" "We talked a few times after that," Cavett said. "He thanked me for asking the question, said it helped him process Billy's death, said music was his way of grieving, but talking about it, really talking about it, had helped too." When Jimi died less than a year later, in September 1970, Dick Cavett was asked to comment. He didn't want to do the typical celebrity tribute. Instead, he shared the clip from that November night, the 2 minutes when Jimi talked about Billy and music and truth. "This is how I want people to remember Jimi Hendrix, not just as an incredible guitarist, but as someone who understood that art is supposed to mean something, that when words fail, music speaks, that grief and anger and confusion can become something beautiful if you're honest enough to share it." The clip played at memorials, at tributes, became one of the most watched moments in Jimi Hendrix's life outside of his performances, because it showed something that guitar solos couldn't show. It showed his heart, his humanity, his understanding that music wasn't just about entertainment or technical skill. It was about processing the darkness and sharing it so others didn't feel alone in theirs. Years later, Billy's family, the friend Jimi had talked about on that show, reached out to Dick Cavett. They'd never known that Jimi had dedicated the Woodstock anthem to Billy, never heard Jimi talk about him publicly. "Thank you for asking that question. Thank you for giving Jimi space to talk about my son, to honor him. We didn't know, and knowing now, it means everything." Cavett kept that letter, framed it alongside a photo from that night's broadcast. Jimi, mid-answer, face serious, telling the truth about his friend.
That's what good television should do, Cavett said. Not just entertain, but create space for truth, for humanity, for the moments when someone says something that matters. And that night, Jimi Hendrix said something that mattered, about loss and music, and how we keep going when the world is dark. And everyone watching learned something about him and about themselves. The question wasn't supposed to be asked. The producers said it was too heavy, too dark, too real for late-night television. But Dick Cavett asked it anyway, and Jimi Hendrix answered it honestly. And for 2 minutes, a television studio became a sacred space where grief and music and truth intersected. And 15 seconds of silence reminded everyone watching that sometimes the most powerful moments are the ones where nobody speaks at all, where we just sit with what we've heard and let it change us. If this story of honesty and grief and music as healing moved you, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who's using creativity to process pain. Have you ever experienced a moment of profound silence after someone shared their truth? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to hit that notification bell for more stories about the moments when entertainment became truth and silence spoke louder than words.